In childhood development, it's healthy for a child to begin separating from the parent. What happens when that doesn't happen? Let's look at this on today's Ask a Strength. Under the weight of emotional demands from a parent, a child may not have confidence in separating from the parent emotionally. So when parents don't help a child grow up in a healthy way, help them find their wings, help them separate from them emotionally, then the child's going to be crushed under that weight and not want to do it. These are normal stages of development now that are being squashed and squandered away because the child doesn't have the confidence and is not being helped in the separation process. The separation process is so important. It's when the child begins to lessen their attachment, their identity with the parent. Now, they needed to have that when they were infants, right? Growing up, early childhood, when they were toddlers. Of course, they need their parent for every little need. But through the stages leading up through adolescence and so on, little by little, they need to find out what they're about. They have to separate. So when this is squashed away, the parent won't help them. They begin to internalize that voice of the parent. They think they really shouldn't have their own needs. I shouldn't have much of an opinion, but of course that's a bunch of BS. So individuation is a process. This is being thwarted, but the child needs to find out that they are indeed a separate identity, a separate person from their parent. And ideally, this should be well on the way by the time a child reaches adolescence. So having a sense of autonomy is so important for the child in this process. Also, what's important is that they feel supported by the parent in finding out what they're all about. When they're a kid, they shouldn't have to wait until they're 30 years old to figure this out, even though that happens a lot more than people realize. And as they're not supported in individuating as they're getting older, at some point, hopefully they will do it in their 20s, 30s, and so on. But they're going to probably struggle because they don't know their values. They don't know what they're all about. They may not want to make decisions that are at odds with their family and extended family. They're not used to that. They're used to being the chameleon, the people pleaser. Now, unsuccessful individuation because a child's identity was thwarted by the parent doesn't mean the child at all, when they get older, has some sort of mental health condition. But they're more prone, however, to suffer from depression and anxiety and low self-esteem and so on. And then perhaps because of this, be diagnosed with a mental health condition. So usually the process of separation and individuation begins around 5 or 6 months of age. It starts early. It's a natural process. Now, of course, this begins to happen because the baby begins to be mobile. They can crawl away from their mother. They can get away. They're spending more and more time away from the mother, and that's healthy. They're learning that they have an I there. And then when they're 2 or 3, they realize there's an I there, and the mother or caretaker becomes a separate person. They're aware it's somebody else. They're not a mesh. They're not merged together. Now, if this doesn't happen and the child is now an adult in their 20s or 30s, that process may begin and hopefully will begin big time. And that's when the child, now an adult, is going to want perhaps to completely pull away from the parent. Sometimes including no contact because they're over it. They realize they've suffered at the hand of their own parent. There's all sorts of mixed feelings. They love the parent, but there's anger, there's confusion. It's affected that now adult's self-identity. So in a way to begin working with this, usually they pull away somehow. Now the parent or parents who maybe and probably are clueless don't understand why now all of a sudden the child's so angry. There's so much emotion there and they don't want to see me all the time. They're not very nice to me. Well, it's because of how the parents raised them. And now they're having their reaction to it. And they need to feel and show this reaction. The adult child now comes out swinging and fighting and ready to find what they're all about. And that means they're going to make this individuation, this separation happen from that parent one way or the other. All of a sudden they're pulling away, they're expressing anger, they're voicing their opinion. They're telling the parent, don't you interrupt me right now, let me finish my thought. They're taking a stance, they're having an I there, and all this needs to happen. So sometimes the parents may go to therapy and say, I don't understand what's going on. All of a sudden my son or my daughter, they don't want to talk to me. I don't know what's wrong with them. I didn't do anything differently. But a good therapist needs to get in there and unpack all this And if in the unpacking we see that that parent or parents emotionally smothered or somehow abused that child their entire childhood, then that therapist needs to let those parents know that this is healthy for the child. They're finally separating, individuating in their 30s, let's say. The adult child doesn't want to play by the old rules, and they're not going to anymore, and that is fantastic. They need to find out what they're all about. They need to challenge themselves to grow, and they get to set any healthy boundaries they want with their parents and or siblings. Carl Jung was a therapist who talked a lot about individuation and healthy separation. You can look up some of his work to learn more about this topic. So individuation, healthy separation is so important as part of childhood development. If it didn't happen to you growing up, are you aware of how this has impacted you? If you're a parent watching this, are you now perhaps putting the pieces together of why your adult son or daughter won't talk to you? Lots to think about here. Please leave me some comments below. I'd love to hear any thoughts you may have. Please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.